Well, in the transverse colon, there's some lymphatic patches called Peyer's patches. And he did a biopsy of these patches and he found the MMR vaccine in every child. And he was surprised that this MMR vaccine seemed to be contributing to the compromised gut flora, the inability of the gut to digest properly. He also found that a lot of his patients, young children, were autistic. So he wrote an article in the Lancet implying very slightly that the MMR vaccine was a contributing factor to these gut problems and also to autism. Well, I'm afraid the pharmaceutical companies rose up in arms because you see the implications. This man's a gastroenterologist. He's a doctor. He is not anti-vaccine. He was more pointing out when they are put together, they appear to cause a problem. The end result of that is he had to extract his article from the Lancet. He lost all his credentials. Now, it wasn't just Dr. Andrew Wakefield. He had a whole team of pathologists. He's written a book, it's called Callous Disregard, because of the callous disregard of the medical profession, pharmaceutical companies, to just have a look at combining these three together. I need to mention this at this point. My talk is not on vaccination, but I need to show you the link that's coming in, because it is true that many babies are vaccinated and don't get autism and don't get the gut problems. And I would like to suggest that a lot of it has to do with the mother's history of this gut flora, because a nice healthy gut flora, it's designed by God to be able to withstand a little bit of beating. It's your border protection and it's your final absorption. The more people I meet, the more people I help with health, I am more and more convinced that what's happening in our bodies, in our babies, our children's bodies, it's not just one thing. Sometimes when a problem happens, it's the final straw. You've heard about the straw that broke the camel's back. It's just the final straw on a whole lot of little things, starting before even baby's born. And you also, I'm sure, realize the saying, education is power. And many parents at this stage are feeling terrible. Oh, what have I done to my baby? But I've got some good news. There's a verse in the Bible, it's found in Acts 17, verse 30, and it says, God winks at our ignorance. So should we. Because you cannot be held accountable if you thought you were doing the best by your baby and yet you were doing in ignorance. The only hope of better things on planet Earth, I believe, is the education of people in right principles. And I'm so happy to see mothers in front of me here, because if the mothers are educated, now they start to know how to build the health and the strength of their children. I was talking to a man on the phone only yesterday, and he has terrible gut problems. And where do you think I started? Way back. Sadly, his mother has passed away. But most mothers of that era, because his mother was a baby boomer, and it was the baby boomers that first used the pill, the contraceptive pill. So if the mother's on the pill, and by the way, why would a human being have a course of antibiotics twice every year? Usually because of sinus problems, usually because of congested chest, maybe it's asthma, maybe it's bronchitis. They are the common forms. Or often in children is ear problems. Newton's third law of motion states that to every action there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Why? We always need to look at why. When a person has excess mucus, constantly blowing nose, the eustachian tubes, which are the tubes that link your eyes and your nose and your mouth and your ear, often called the eustachian tubes. When interference is happening in there because of excess mucus, there's the ear problems, there's the sinus problems, there's the blowing of the nose, the chest problems. Why has that been caused? It's usually an allergy. And the most common allergens are dairy. I was reading one newspaper article that was showing a research in Australia that state that 60% of Australians can't handle cow's milk. Now the cow has 5 stomachs, and at the end of those 5 stomachs there's a substance that's very, very similar to yogurt and feta cheese. So if a human being wants to eat dairy, they are really the 2 ways that it should be eaten. And lactose, which is what the allergy usually is to, if the feta cheese and the yogurt is well made, there is no lactose left. It's the milk sugar, because the culturing process has broken that all down to a substance that is fairly easily to digest. One lady said to me, well, what milk do you drink, Barbara? I said to her, I'm weaned. I'm an adult with teeth. I eat food. You see, milk is for babies, and cow's milk is for baby cows, and human milk is for baby humans. But granted, not every mother is able to feed her baby. If a mother really wants to, she can contact the Australian Breastfeeding Association, ABA, and they have wonderful helpers in helping women to breastfeed. So, number 1 allergens is dairy products. Whenever I look particularly at a little Aboriginal child, and there are quite a few that living round our way, with green coming out of their nose, they're a little bit extra on the weight, and they've got a chesty cough, and they're pulling at their ears, you know what I say? There's a cow's milk baby. There's a cow's milk baby. I met a lady one day, she said, I could not feed my baby. She was in her 60s. She said, the doctor tested my milk, it was thin and it was blue. What is she comparing it to? What is he comparing it to? Cow's milk, which is rich and thick and produces that rich, thick mucus, especially the green stuff. Do you know that milk is perfect for the needs of a human baby? So dairy is a very common allergen. Don't we need milk for our calcium? Well, the orangutans and the elephants and the giraffes and the apes, where do they get their calcium from? Greens. You see that a cow can access, a baby calf can access the calcium from the mother's milk because it's got 5 stomachs to break it down and make it into a form that is accessible. But did you know that the countries in this world that consume the highest amounts of dairy products have the highest incidence of osteoporosis? It is not true that cow's milk will deliver a good form of calcium. It is a form of calcium that's very difficult for the human body to access. So dairy is a very common allergen. The other common allergen is wheat. And many cereals that babies are given are wheat. Some mothers have told me they soften Weet Bix with milk to give it to their baby. Then the baby's getting the 2 allergens. Now, the wheat that God created was called emmer wheat. And the protein or the gluten structure of the emmer wheat is very fragile. And it's good that it's fragile because our gut can easily break it down. But in the 1950s, wheat was hybridized in Mexico. It was hybridized, and this hybridized wheat, it didn't grow as tall, only about this tall. It produced grain a lot quicker, and it almost doubled the yield of the grain. And they hybridized the wheat so that it would produce more wheat, so that the starvation problem in Mexico could be solved, and it solved it. And no one complains about that. In fact, a Nobel Prize was received by the researchers that did it. But the problem arose in the 1970s when that hybridized wheat grain went all over the world. And that hybridized wheat grain has a very complex structure. Complex structure means a lot more difficult for the gut to break down. Now, if the gut looks like this, can you see what's happening with this? It's barely able to be broken down. So border protection is compromised, and so partially digested parts of this wheat grain is getting into the blood. And so the white blood cells produce more eosinophils, which are a special type of white blood cell designed to deal with these remnants of the partially broken down grain. And when high eosinophils are present, you see eosinophil has histamine in it. So when high eosinophil is in the blood, you get high histamine. And high histamine spells allergy.